Introducing Rabbi Joel Zeff, 10:01 on a Wednesday morning as we zip along with the Efrat Kollel on Zoom. Yet again, Rabbi Zeff, is this part 3 of the
Correct.
topic of Mashiach and messianism? Let's resurrect
Okay.
the topic.
Nice to see everybody again. This is our third component discussing the idea of Mashiach. Last week, what we saw was the Rambam's reliance on the story of Bar Kokhba as the way it's narrated and formulated in the Talmud Yerushalmi in his understanding of messianism. Specifically, we saw that the Talmud Yerushalmi gives a not very flattering description of the Bar Kokhba rebellion, in which Bar Kokhba is portrayed as a kind of Greek tragic hero, in which he has tremendous talents, tremendous military talent, tremendous charisma, but at the same time, he has a fatal flaw. And that fatal flaw is, as in a Greek tragedy, is hubris. And we saw this in the way that Bar Kokhba insisted that in order to be part of his army, you had to be willing to cut off your pinky, which the rabbis objected to. And then he came up with, or actually the rabbis came up with an alternative method of uprooting a cedar of Lebanon while riding on a horse. Then we see, as the story develops, that as they're going out to war, there's an old man who says to the soldiers, "May the Lord be with you." And they answer, "He doesn't have to be with us as long as he's not against us." It's a pretty remarkable thing to say. And then we see, as the story goes on, that that the Bar Kokhba suspects that his own uncle, who is the saintly rabbi, who is praying that God's not sit in judgment against Beitar, the last stronghold of the Beitar rebellion, that God not judge the city of Beitar, because if he were to judge the city of Beitar, the judgment would not be positive for the city of Beitar. And Bar Kokhba interprets that as a result of the certain machinations of a Samaritan. I don't want to go into the whole story again. He suspects that this rabbi is somehow a member of a left-wing political party, a peacenik, like Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai in the story of the falling of the Second Temple. And he actually, according to this story, Bar Kokhba himself kills the saintly rabbi by kicking him to death. And that's the end of the story in the Talmud Yerushalmi. And it says that as a result of the sins of this hubris, that Beitar was captured and Bar Kokhba was killed. Now, the Rambam, basing himself upon that, addresses the issue of, well, how do we know who the Mashiach is? So when Bruce comes out of the closet and declares, "I am the Messiah,"
Rabbi McCohen, it's got to be, I think, more in your family than
that's
mine.
true. When Arthur declares himself to be the Messiah, so we want to know, is that claim verifiable? So the Rambam says, well, I'll tell you what you can't do. You can't subject the would-be Messiah, the contender for being Messiah, to a miracle test. Let's see if you can do a miracle. If you can do a miracle, if you can walk on water, right? Then he's the Messiah, and if not, not. So the Rambam says that clearly is not the way to test the Messiah. And then he refers to the story of Rabbi Akiva and Bar Kokhba. And he claims that, as we know, Rabbi Akiva declared Bar Kokhba to be the Messiah. Yet there are no overt miracles in the story as portrayed in the Talmud Yerushalmi. Tremendous military victories, but they could all be explained naturally. So that's Rabbi Akiva's, Bar Kokhba, Rambam. Rambam's conclusion that you see from here, that since Bar Kokhba didn't do any overt miracles and he was not subjected to any miracle test, that's not something that you are required to do in order to verify a messianic claim. Yes, Bruce.
If we would see that the Rambam, in overwhelming majority of cases, quotes from the Bavli instead of the Yerushalmi, but chooses the Yerushalmi in this case, would that suggest that he has the Rambam has a perspective already and is using the Yerushalmi kind of an asmachta to just justify his position? Or is he
Yeah,
learning out from the Yerushalmi and developing his worldview on the matter?
yeah, not necessarily, and for reasons we actually mentioned last week, and that is the Rabbi Yosef Karo in his commentary in the Mishnah Torah points out that the Rambam is actually relying upon a Bavli. Why? Because there's the view in the Bavli of Shmuel that the messianic era will be naturalistic. At least that's the way the Rambam interprets Shmuel, where the Shmuel says that there's no distinction between this world and the messianic world except for Jewish sovereignty, which the Rambam interprets to mean that don't expect there to be any supernatural existence in the messianic era. So once the Rambam, according to the Beit Yosef, according to Rabbi Yosef Karo, in his commentary in the Mishnah Torah called Kesef Mishnah, so once he passes like Shmuel in the Bavli, that informs how he's going to then interpret the historical narrative of Bar Kokhba, and therefore he chooses the historical narrative in the Yerushalmi because consistent with the opinion of Shmuel in the Bavli.
But even I can ask the same question on the Bavli. Shmuel and Rav seems to always win religious questions, and Shmuel seems to win medical business matters. So the Mashiach, in this case, if it's a religious issue, he'd go with Rav. If it's more of a historical, I'm not sure, like a natural idea, then he'd go with Shmuel.
Yeah. So I'm not 100% sure if this is a machlokes between Rav and Shmuel, because the dispute between on this particular issue is actually between Rabbi Yochanan and Shmuel. So I'm not sure that that's relevant in this particular case. Okay. Now, we also saw last week that a older contemporary of the Rambam, Rabbi Avram ben David, usually referred to in yeshivas the Ravid or Ra'avad. So the Ravid says, Rambam, are you off your rocker? Where'd you get this crazy idea from? You never learned the Talmud Bavli? Because it says in the Bavli something quite different. And then we saw the passage in the Bavli, with very different narrative altogether, which says that Bar Kokhba claimed to be the Messiah, as Arthur may do today. And the rabbi said, wait a second, based upon a verse in Yeshayahu, which says that V'haricho birat Hashem, he's going to be able to sense or smell, literally, with his fear of God, that means that the Mashiach is going to have supernatural sense. So let's subject this messianic pretender or contender, maybe a better word, to the messianic scratch, sniff, and smell test. That's what I like to call it. And that's what they did. They subjected him to this test to see if he could do a miracle. So I kind of facetiously, gave a scenario, lined up three people, like a police lineup. One of them is a serial murderer. The other ones are innocent, law-abiding citizens. Asked Bar Kokhba to identify with his nose the serial murderer. He fails the test. And then the Talmud Bavli says that since he failed the test, the rabbis killed him. Not the Romans. The rabbis killed him because he's like a false Messiah. Right? So Arthur, just be careful before you proclaim yourself to be the Messiah.
Why do you think they took that story literally rather than euphemistically, that he's using his intuition when the facts aren't clear, rather than literally he smelled? I mean,
okay, so first of all, I'm trying to be a little humorous by saying smelled. So it's not that they do definitely interpret it, at least according to the Ravid, as a supernatural sense. I don't literally mean the sense of smell, but not just intuition. There's right. Put it this way, you don't kill somebody based upon faulty intuition. Right? But if in fact he's supposed to have a supernatural ability to have a sure sense, like prophecy, of reality, and they subjected him to that test, and he failed, right? So they then killed him. So that's the reference that the Rabbi is referring to, the Talmud Bavli. And what emerges from this, of course, is that if someone asked you, can you subject a candidate to be Messiah to a test, whether or not he can do a miracle or have some kind of miraculous sense, the answer is, as almost everything in Judaism, it's a machloikas. It's a dispute. And it's a dispute between the Rambam, who says, you see from the story of Rabbi Akiva and Bar Kokhba, as formulated in the Yerushalmi, that there's no expectation of doing miracles, and you can't use that basis to test the veracity of a messianic claim. On the other hand, there's the Rabbi, who's basing himself upon the Talmud Bavli, which seems to suggest that one does subject a messianic claim to verification using this notion that he should be able to do a miracle. Okay, now we're going to go one step further. According to the Rambam, we know what you can't do to verify whether or not Arthur is the Messiah. You can't ask him to do a miracle, to walk on water.
I think Arthur pulled a sword out of a stone once.
That's impressive. So he can be the King of England. So the
if I could walk on water, they would say I couldn't swim.
Okay. So according to the Rambam,
wait a minute. If he can't perform a miracle, that means he's not the Mashiach?
According to the Ravid, based upon the Talmud Bavli. That's correct. But don't confuse, right? This is a dispute. According to the Ravid, based upon the Talmud Bavli, if he can't perform a miracle, he's not the Messiah. According to the Rambam, based upon Shmuel and the Talmud Yerushalmi, there's no such thing as a demand that he perform a miracle.
Are we talking both about the Mashiach ben Yosef, Mashiach ben David? I mean, are we separating the two, or are we using the model of Bar Kokhba, where he couldn't pass the smell test, and therefore we came up with the concept of two Mashiachs?
Yeah. So the Rambam, to my best of my knowledge, and I'm pretty confident about this, never mentions the concept of Mashiach ben Yosef. And the Ravid, in this particular case of analyzing the Rambam, doesn't invoke that. So it's sort of not part of the picture at this point, the Mashiach ben Yosef idea. So now I want to know, according to the Rambam, if I can't ask him, according to the Ravid, it's easy to settle the issue of someone claims to be the Messiah, have him do a miracle. If he can, wow. If he can't, wow. Okay, wow for whoa, maybe I should say, not wow, but whoa.
Who would determine this? What structure?
Well, according to the Talmud Bavli, the sages. It doesn't say who they are. I suppose it's the Supreme Court, the Beit Din Hagadol. So nowadays, of course, that's a little bit of a problem. But I would say the new chief rabbi of Efrat probably would take care of it. Okay. Now I just saw the news yesterday. So in any case, so according to the Rambam, who says you can't ask him for a miracle, so how do you know who the Messiah is, right? If someone makes a claim, how do you verify it or not? So we're going to take a look at a really fascinating and famous, some of you may have seen this before, passage in the Rambam, where he tries to explain how can you verify a messianic claim. And I'm going to show you how the Rambam, not surprisingly, is utterly consistent. You remember that we had suggested last week that his understanding of how you can determine the Messiah is very much based upon the story of the relationship between Rabbi Akiva and Bar Kokhba. Since Rabbi Akiva didn't ask Bar Kokhba to prove he's the Messiah based upon a miracle, so and Rabbi Akiva was not hesitant to proclaim the Messiah in any case, so I guess you can't ask for a miracle. Keep that in mind. And now we're going to look at a really fascinating passage. So this is on page 6 in your source sheet. And the Rambam says the following. V'im yamod melech mi beit David. If there will arise a king from the house of David, and just Arthur, let's just do a little checklist here. Okay, check number 1. He qualifies. Hogeh Torah, who contemplates the Torah. No doubt about it. Arthur, 2 out of 2. Osek b'mitzvot keDavid aviv. He's involved in mitzvot like King David, his ancestor. Wow, 3 out of 3. Kafi Torah should be according to the written Torah and the oral Torah, 4 out of 4, or I guess that's a subset of 3. V'yachov kol Yisrael leilech ba, and he literally forces all Israel to follow the Torah. Let's just say he inspires them. Okay, Arthur is a source of inspiration for all those who know him to follow the Torah. Ulachazek bitka, and he strengthens the breaches in observance of the Torah. V'yilachem milchamot Hashem, he fights the wars of the Lord. Wow. So I lost track of the number there, but something like 4 or 5. And so far, Arthur's in the running. Very impressive. So if he fulfills all of those things, Harei ze bechezkachu Mashiach. He has the chazakah of being Mashiach. Chazakah means halachic presumption. Now, you may have come across this. This is a very common concept in halachic context. You know, one of the most interesting and common issues dealt with in the Talmud, in Jewish law, is how do you treat doubt? A lot of times we don't know if something's kosher, not kosher. Is somebody tameh, not tameh, right? So how do you deal with case of doubt? So chazakah, halachic presumption, is a very important idea in the context of that discussion. It doesn't mean you know for sure. It means I'm allowed to make a presumption. Allowed to make a presumption. Now, the Rambam is relying upon, at this point, the description of what the Mashiach will do, as we saw in our first session. Remember, we went through several passages in the prophets. They describe what the Mashiach will accomplish. So the Rambam says that there is a messianic to-do list. There's a to-do list. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And he says, if the person who claims to be the Messiah fulfills certain criteria that describe the Messiah as found in the prophetic writings, if he fulfills 5 out of those 7 criteria, at that point, that person has chezkat Mashiach, the presumption of being Mashiach. Now, I just want to take one step back and explain why one would even be interested in establishing a premise of being Mashiach before we know whether he's Mashiach for sure. We'll see in a second that there's a way to determine if he's Mashiach bivadai, certainly, without any doubt. And the reason is, I think, obvious, and that is that after Arthur proclaims himself to be the Mashiach, and we see that he qualifies to have that position under presumption, Chezkat Mashiach, there are some practical issues that arise. He says, I'm forming an army to fight the wars of the Lord. Well, people have to be drafted or volunteer. You have to make a decision. You're going to be part of that. He needs architects, artisans, etc., to start rebuilding the Beit HaMikdash. You want to join in that, right? So there's a lot of practical decisions that have to be made even before you know whether he's Mashiach for sure or not. So we have to be able to establish, is this a good bet? So if he has these qualities that are enumerated here, that he comes from the right yichus, and he meditates in the Torah, he observes the mitzvot, he acts as an inspiration to encouraging the Jewish people to strengthen their Torah observance, he's fighting the wars of the Lord. So all of those things then place him in the category of Chezkat Mashiach, and you can join his army. Fine. Im asa, I go back to the text. If he did all those things, did he tzliach, and he was successful. This is extremely important idea. The Mashiach has to be a winner, successful. Uvana mikdash bimkomo, and now he accomplishes final items on the messianic to-do list. He builds the Beit HaMikdash in its place. V'kibeitz Tzimchei Yisrael, and he takes all the Jews from all over the world, including Teaneck, New Jersey, and he brings them to Eretz Yisrael. Harei ze Mashiach b'vadai. This is certainly Mashiach. So the Rambam, in a fascinating way, has a 2-tiered process to determine who's the Mashiach. If he accomplishes this candidate 5 out of 7, he's Chezkat Mashiach, presumption of being a Mashiach. If it's 7 out of 7, he's a winner, he's tzliach, he succeeded, then he's Mashiach b'vadai. V'yitaken et ha'olam kulo la'avod et Hashem b'yachad. and he will prepare the entire world to serve the Lord together. And he quotes the pasuk from the prophet Zephaniah, the whole world is going to be transformed into one language. All of them will call in the name of the Lord and will serve the Lord as one. Okay.
Is that second stage considered natural also?
Yes,
just
100%. We'll get to that a little bit later, but 100%.
so
Because
so Koresh could not be the Mashiach because he's not Jewish, although maybe people thought he was, and Shabtai Tzvi can't be because he died. Even though he might, people like were in the process of doing all kinds of some of these things, but they're knocked out of the box basically.
Okay. Yes. Okay. And we're going to explore the latter idea, why Shabtai Tzvi couldn't be the Mashiach. By the way, there's a lot of reasons why he couldn't be the Mashiach, including abrogating the Torah. But in any case, now, what I want to try to understand is what forces the Rambam to adopt this two-tiered process. Chezkat Mashiach and Mashiach Vadai, presumption and then certainly. Now, one consideration is just practical, and that is, like I said before, because if Arthur wants you to, be part of the building committee to build the Beit HaMikdash, or to be a soldier in his army, etc. So there's practical reasons why you might want to know whether that's a good decision or not. But there's actually a more important factor. That is the following. So this is a very famous idea. If you look in the traditional edition of the Rambam, where we just got up to, the end of that first paragraph, the pasuk from Zephaniah, that all the nations will serve God as one. That's the end of this Rambam. All the rest of the words on this page that are in brackets are deleted from all traditional editions of the Rambam. The reason we know about these paragraphs is because of Yemenite manuscripts. But all the editions of the Rambam, other than those manuscripts, delete everything else. So let's take a look at these paragraphs which don't appear in the Rambam you have at home on the shelf or in the yeshiva. So the Rambam writes, according to the manuscript, which was deleted, Vim lo itzliach hadko. So what about if this messianic candidate doesn't succeed, right? He didn't accomplish all of these things. He didn't rebuild the Beit HaMikdash, and he didn't bring all the Jews from Tanach to Efrat. Oh, ne'erag, or he's killed, right? He didn't accomplish these things because he couldn't. He's dead. He was killed. Now, by the way, why didn't he just say he died? Because the Rambam is looking at what paradigm to determine how you know who the Mashiach is. Bar Kochba. What was the end of Bar Kochba? Neherag ba'avonot. He was killed because of his sins. So that's why he says, if he didn't succeed or he was killed, so the Rambam goes on, Bi'adu sheno zeshi yifticha Torah. Then you know for sure he's not the promised one.
There was someone else who was killed too, they thought was Mashiach. Can it be referring to that?
Who do you have in mind?
Jesus.
Oh, sure. There are any contenders will do. But because we know the Rambam explicitly used the story of Rabbi Akiva and Bar Kochba. See, I'll discuss Jesus in a second, but Bar Kochba was a better example because Bar Kochba actually generated certain hopeful expectations, like Rabbi Akiva thought he was Mashiach. Mashiach, Chezkat Mashiach. See, the Rambam struggling. How could Rabbi Akiva make such a terrible mistake? The answer is, it wasn't a mistake. When Rabbi Akiva called Bar Kochba Mashiach, he meant he's Bechezkat Mashiach, presumption of Mashiach. At what point did Rabbi Akiva know he wasn't Mashiach? When he was killed, without accomplishing the rebuilding the Beit HaMikdash or the ingathering of the exiles. That's where the Rambam gets this from.
Do we have any evidence that Bar Kokhba was Machzir B'Tshuvah? He was bringing the people to keep Torah and Mitzvot? I've never read that we have any evidence of that.
So actually, we have partial evidence, and that is,
Letters.
I think, we have letters in which he describes
distributing
procuring,
Ephraim.
the Arba
he's like-
Aminim.
He liked
for-
Sukkos, so he
No.
liked Sukkos. That doesn't mean he
Okay.
brought people to yeshiva and learning and Torah and mitzvahs. He liked to keep Sukkos.
Okay, so I think that's that'd be a little bit strange to say he happened to have a favorite holiday. I mean, the fact that we have letters that describe that he made efforts to make sure that Jews would be able to observe Sukkot is reflective of the fact that he seemed to be committed to Torah mitzvot.
No, but any army rabbi would do that today. That doesn't mean he's bringing the whole army to Torah. A lot of Chabad rabbis in the army, they bring that. Sitters out, kosher food. I mean, it's great.
Yeah, okay, it's true. But look, we stumbled upon one letter. Like, we don't have the complete writings of Bar Kokhba. But the fact that at least we have one bit of evidence is suggestive, put it that way. But the other thing which is suggestive, and it's sort of circular what I'm about to say, won't satisfy Arthur, and it shouldn't, and that is that it would be extraordinary for Rabbi Akiva. Just imagine who Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva is the Moshe of his generation. The Talmud sees him that way. It'd be extraordinary if Bar Kokhba was not a Torah Jew and didn't in some way bring about a spiritual renaissance on some level. For Rabbi Akiva to call him the Mashiach. Now, again, that's not utterly compelling, but it's reasonable. And also, of course, there's an issue of, I guess we could say it, extent. In other words, was he the Lubavitcher Rebbe, who I think can be credited with ushering in a true gigantic spiritual renaissance, the Baal Tshuva movement, etc. That's largely due and should be credited to the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Did Bar Kokhba usher in something like that, or was it on a smaller scale? I don't know. But even if it was on some smaller scale, it doesn't really matter because he was killed. So there is, from Rabbi Akiva's perspective, wow, here is a general. But you know what this reminds me of? There was I forget his name now. He was I think a general, F.E.A. Tom. Does anybody remember this?
Yeah, from Kuznov in the north. He's a Baal Tshuva.
There was he happened to be a Baal Tshuva, but he was a religious, I think he was a general or a very high-ranking officer. Yes. He became involved in politics. This goes way back. And I remember the thrill that everybody had. I mean, this was somebody who could eventually become Rosh Memshalah. He dropped out of politics. I don't know what he does anymore. But at that point, I think in the national religious community, at least, there was this, wow, this is awesome. Here's a very accomplished and who had this kind of meteoric rise in politics, who was a Torah Jew in a way that people at Efrat would be very happy about. Keep us through God, wow, and he's a general and all in one package. So now, so that I could see people raising, I think at the time they did, kind of like, this is evocative. He maybe is the Mashiach. I don't know if people said that explicitly, but I think that was sort of, it was evocative. And so you don't necessarily have to transform completely, maybe in Rabbi Akiva's eyes, all Jews become religious for the Rambam's description to apply, it's in process. I guess you could say it like that. Rabbi Akiva or Bar Kokhba's inspirational presence, it was a kind of return to Judaism and a religious revival in process. Okay, so I think the questions were better than the answer, but that's the best we could do.
Does this have to be one person as opposed to a government or you know what I mean?
The Rambam seems to interpret it as a person. Mashiach means king, the anointed king, right? It means a one person. Okay, it doesn't mean he doesn't have ministers who work under him and a government, but you have to have a Rosh Memshalah. Mamishala. You have to have a king. Okay. So what happens if he doesn't succeed, right? If he doesn't succeed, the Rambam says that, he's not the one. Well, then who was he? V'harehu kechol malchei Beit David. Well, then he's just like any other king of the house of David, Hashleimim Bakshirim, who was kosher, Shemei, who died, right? He could have been the Mashiach, I guess, maybe, but he wasn't. How do I know he wasn't? Because he didn't accomplish the messianic to-do list. For the Rambam, that's the way you know if a person has graduated from Chezkat Mashiach, presumption of Mashiach, to Mashiach B'vadai, certainly Mashiach. If he accomplishes the totality of the messianic to-do list. If he doesn't, because he dies or killed, right? So he's not. So why was he so prominent and promising, etc.? It was a test. And he quotes a pasuk from Daniel, right? That he could have been, it was a test, we didn't merit it, and he ended up not being the Mashiach. The Gemara says about Chizkiyahu. Chizkiyahu could have been the Mashiach, right? But didn't work out. We weren't deserving. Okay. So that's Bar Kokhba, who had promise of being Mashiach. He was Bechezkat Mashiach, but didn't graduate to Mashiach B'vadai because he died, in this case killed, before he had accomplished the messianic to-do list. But now look what the Rambam says. Now that you'll understand why this was censored. Af Yeshua HaNotri, but Jesus, the Nazarite, Shedimash Mashiach, who imagined that he'd be Mashiach, V'nerag B'veitin, and he was killed by the Beitin. It's really interesting. There's a lot of books out that are responding to the Christian claim that Jews killed Jesus. So, no, I can prove that the Romans really killed him. The Rambam doesn't seem to be too worried about that. He says that the Beitin killed him. He doesn't mean that the Roman Beitin, the Jewish Beitin killed him. Now, he probably means the Beitin convicted him and the Romans executed him, but it was at the behest of the Beitin, and according to the Rambam, there's nothing to be embarrassed about. Kvar nitnabe vo Daniel. So the Rambam says, Jesus was already prophesied about by the prophet Daniel. The Christians claim that there's a lot of references in the Tanach to Jesus. The Rambam agrees, but not the ones that the Christians think. That the prophet Daniel does talk about Jesus. What's that verse? Let's take a look at it. Uvnei pritzei amcha yinasu. That the lawbreakers of your nation will lift themselves up, la'amid chazon, to establish the vision. There'll be law-breaking people who will claim to fulfill the messianic vision, but they will fail. That's Jesus. The prophet Daniel prophesies Jesus, someone who will falsely attempt to be a lawbreaker, pritzei amcha, a lawbreaker, who will say, I'm the Mashiach, I'm the fulfillment of the chazon of the vision, but they will fail. And now the Rambam says, after he quotes that verse from Daniel, was there ever a bigger failure than Jesus? Was there ever a bigger failure than Jesus? How so? Remember that the Rambam says how you know who the Mashiach is? If he accomplishes the messianic to-do list based on what the prophets say that Jesus will accomplish. The Jesus was not like Bar Kokhba. Bar Kokhba was impressive. He accomplished several items in the messianic to-do list, but he didn't accomplish them all before he died. That's how you know he's not the Mashiach. That's not true of Jesus. Jesus is qualitatively different. All of the prophets said that the Mashiach will redeem the Jewish people and save them. And he will gather in their exiles. And he will strengthen their mitzvah observance. Zeff, but this one, Jesus, garam la'abed Yisrael b'cherev. He, through Christianity, caused the Jewish people to be destroyed by the sword. Ulefazer she'iritam, to cause their remnant to be scattered. Ulahash bilam, to cause them to be humiliated. Ulahachlif Torah, to cause the Torah to be exchanged, not to strengthen it, but to exchange the Torah with the new, so-called New Testament. Uladot rav ha'olam la'avod Elohim beladei Hashem. And instead of bringing the world to worship the one God, he led astray the majority of the world to worship a God who's not God. So what's the Rambam saying? I want you to savor this. This is not polite. And I hope you can appreciate why this was censored. The Rambam is saying that whereas Bar Kokhba had the presumption of being Mashiach, and therefore Rabbi Akiva called him Mashiach, Jesus, in fact, did not accomplish any of the messianic to-do list. On the contrary, everything the Mashiach is supposed to do, Jesus, through Christianity, accomplished the opposite. Now, according to this is really fascinating. According to Rambam, Jesus is not Christ. He's the Antichrist. According to Rambam, Jesus is the Antichrist. He's the opposite of Mashiach because he accomplished the inverse, exactly the opposite of all of the items on the messianic to-do list. Can you appreciate why you don't necessarily want this text to circulate in Europe, at least?
I'm surprised you're saying it over our. You're being recorded. Who knows? Who knows going to listen to this?
Well, we'll have to talk about whether we should post this. Look, I'm not saying my opinion. It's the Rambam. You want to go crucify the Rambam?
Rabbi Zeff,
Yes.
I mean, this is fascinating. I've read it before, and it is fascinating, obviously. Intriguing to read something that was censored for so many hundreds of years, and it's just come to light. But my question is, why is the Rambam taking this aside? And it really is like totally irrelevant to, I mean, we could bring a list of another 50 people who were considered to be Mashiach and had none of the characteristics of Mashiach. Why is he picking on Jesus to bring this in a halachic?
Jesus was so successful. I mean, and they do outreach to Jews, trying to get us to convert because they say he's the Mashiach. Who else is there out there in the world does that?
Okay, so I think there's two reasons. And one of them is what Bruce just said, and that is that, I mean, Shabtai Tzvi is, first of all, Shabtai is after the Rambam, so there's nothing to discuss. But, there have been false messiahs even before the Rambam was around, which he could have discussed. I think that's your point. Why is he picking on Jesus? So one reason, I think the main reason is what Bruce said. Christianity has to be dealt with. And Islam, right? Those are the two great religions in the Rambam's time. You'll see he'll deal with Islam in a second. So in dealing with the claims of these gigantic religions which have captured the imagination of the known world, the Rambam, it's not a footnote. This is central to the idea. What about their messianic claims? So I think that justifies dealing with this. The other point is just to make the distinction between a partial fulfillment of the messianic to-do list, like Bar Kokhba on the one hand, and something very different, and that is Antichrist, right? The fulfillment of the antithesis of the messianic to-do list. I think that's an important point that the Rambam wants to get across. Okay, now so now the Rambam says
would there be a difference today with Jews for Jesus who move to Israel, wear their tzitzis out, keep Torah, are meticulous, and just happen to also believe in this idea that Jesus and God are somehow like the same person? Is there a difference from in the days of Christianity before, in terms of doing the do list of the Mashiach?
Well, see, if you want to know, according to the Rambam, you want to know if the person is Mashiach or not, you don't look at his followers, you look at what he did. So if the limited question was Jesus the Messiah, you have to ask yourself, what did he accomplish? So since what he accomplished is the inverse of the messianic to-do list, so it wouldn't be the Mashiach. That's in terms of a limited issue. Now, there's another issue I don't want to talk about right now, and that is there something possibly kosher about being a Jew for Jesus if you're from, as it were? So, there's this, I don't want to go into all discussion of it, but there's the idea of hatovel b'sheretz b'yado, someone who goes in the mikveh but has a snake in their hand, right? It's something impure, right? If you believe a human being is God, I don't care how from you are, right? Everything is illegitimate because you're an idol worshiper, right? God is not a human being. Okay, let's go on. Aval machshavot. Now it's shocking. I actually think what the Rambam says now is more shocking than what he just said before. Because bear in mind, he just said that Jesus is the Antichrist. Now he says something pretty fascinating about the Antichrist. And my apologies to Christians who may be listening to this. We're looking at text. You don't have to agree with it. Aval machshavot borei olam. But the thoughts of the creator of the universe, ein koch badam lasigam. We don't have the capacity to understand them. In other words, God has a sense of humor which is incomprehensible. Also, I'm being facetious, but more or less. Kilo derachenu derachav, our ways are not God's ways. V'lo machshavotenu machshavotav, and our thoughts are not God's thoughts. V'chol hadvarim ha'elu, and all of these matters pertaining Shali Yeshua Nosri to Jesus. V'shel zeh ha'yishmaeli, and that Yishmaelite. Who's that Yishmaelite?
Muhammad.
That's Muhammad. Shamad Acharav, who arose after Jesus. So it's pretty amazing, assuming that God's in charge, that these two religions, which are derivative of Judaism in many ways, have captured the imagination of the entire known world. The Buddhists, I guess, the Rambam didn't know about Buddhism, I don't think. Okay, so how did that happen? So all of these things, Einan El Yasher Derech LaMelech Mashiach, they are in fact there to pave the way for King Messiah. That though Jesus is the Antichrist, he's the redemptive Antichrist. He is there because he has a role to play in the redemptive process. Jesus is the redemptive Antichrist. How so? To prepare the whole world to serve the Lord together. And he quotes the pasuk, which is from Zephaniah, which in the edited text that appears in the printed editions of the Rambam, that pasuk is, everything above it is deleted, and just that pasuk from Zephaniah is quoted. Ketzad, in what way is Jesus preparing the way for the true redemption of the world? Because now, as a result of Islam and Christianity, primarily Christianity, the whole world knows about the concept of Mashiach. The whole world knows about the Torah. The whole world knows about mitzvot. Doesn't mean they do them or understand them properly, but they've got the basic awareness that these things exist. And these ideas have spread to faraway continents. And to nations of uncircumcised hearts. And they talk about these concepts of Mashiach and Torah and mitzvot. They talk about them incorrectly, but they talk about them. Some people say, oh, these mitzvot used to be true, but they're no longer active. They weren't supposed to be operative forever. Some people say that there's hidden ideas within these mitzvot. Shouldn't be understood at face value. But the Mashiach has already come, and he's now revealed the true meaning of the Torah. No mistakes that Christians make and Muslims make. And when the true Messiah will arise, and be successful, because that's the precondition to be Mashiach. You have to be a winner. You got to do all the things on the messianic to-do list. Be exalted. Immediately, all the Muslims and Christians will do tshuva, because the Mashiach will be an outstanding educator. And since they already know about fundamental ideas, they just understand them in a twisted way. It will be a relatively easy job for the Mashiach to re-educate them in order to understand these things properly. They'll understand they'll understand that they inherited lies from their forefathers. And their so-called prophets and forefathers led them astray. So Rambam is saying the following. Think about the world before Christianity and before Islam. There were two religions, the way the Rambam thinks of it. There's Judaism, the truth, and there's idolatry. That's it. Now, that is a huge gap. The difference in Christianity and Islam and Judaism is profoundly less than between Judaism and idolatry. That the historical function in God's providential sense of humor is to bring the world closer to the truth through step by step, which is actually a fundamental idea in the Rambam's thinking, how things work gradually, by using Christianity and Islam, which are derivatives of Judaism, though distortions. But by bringing them to these intermediate stages of Christianity and Islam, there's fertile ground to then bring them to the ultimate truth, which is the truth of the Torah. So claims the Rambam. Okay, now, any questions or comments on this idea? And then I'm going to make a point.
Do you think that that's actually true? Because a pagan that might believe in a lot of powers, with one power on top of everything, might come to Judaism more easily if they're not so ideological. Because Christianity, having our book, they can't accept our interpretation of the same book that they were using. It destroys their belief in their faith. I mean, it's like a zero-sum game. But a pagan could say, you know what, that we believe in a higher power, and now we're going to believe in Judaism, that higher power.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I mean, I actually heard maybe two different points in what you're making. One of them is that a pagan or a Christian has sort of a vested interest in the distorted Jewish ideas. It's might be a little bit harder to, did something happen?
Yeah, let's put it back. Arthur, can you fix that? I think.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Yeah. There we go. So okay. So that's an interesting point, and the second point I thought you were making is sometimes, and it might be related, that it's easier to go from no preconceptions to the truth than distorted preconceptions. I guess that's similar to what you're saying. It reminds me, by the way, of the whole Baal Tshuva movement, that sometimes it's easier to inspire somebody who grew up with no Jewish education to come to the truth of Efrat orthodoxy than it is for someone who had a strong non-Orthodox education, who is very committed to a certain vision of Judaism. I've actually seen this quite a bit, that dynamic. You're saying something similar to that. It's a good point. I don't know exactly what the Rambam would say. I understand the Rambam's point. I think it makes a lot of sense, but it's an interesting point you're making as well. Any other comments or questions on what we said so far? Okay, now I want to get, if that wasn't controversial enough, I would like to get a little bit more controversial, and that is to ask the question about the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Okay, now first of all, I have to preface this by saying that I have on the walls of my house, unlike many rabbis' walls, I only have pictures of two rabbis. So, Rav Kook, not surprising, and the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Those are the only two photographs of rabbis they have. I got a picture of myself. That doesn't count. So I only tell you that because I have the most profound respect for the most recent Lubavitcher Rebbe. And I consider in my own spiritual path, I learn Chabad Hasidut on a regular basis. When I was the rabbi in Sacramento, this is an interesting story. So I had the Chabad rabbi in Sacramento was a colleague of mine. There were two centers of Orthodoxy in Sacramento, the shul that I was the rabbi of, which is an OU shul. And then there was Chabad house. And so Rabbi Mendy Cohen, the rabbi there in Sacramento, we were very good friends, are very good friends to this day. And we established a joint educational program. I taught Tanya and he taught the Rambam.
Mhm.
This is true. So I'm telling you that because I want you to know that whatever we're going to say moving forward now is out of the deepest respect for the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Now, the claim that the Rebbe was the Messiah and is the Messiah. How does one process that based upon what we know so far? So I would say, and I've tried to see this in other ways, but I think it's utterly compelling, and I don't see an argument in any other way, that according to the Rambam, there is no possible way to suggest that the Lubavitcher Rebbe, assuming he actually died, is the Mashiach. Why? Because the Rambam is as clear as could possibly be that the way we determine if somebody is Mashiach is based upon whether they accomplish the messianic to-do list. It's that simple. And if they don't, if they ended their career before they accomplished the messianic to-do list, then they are clearly not the Mashiach. As the Rambam says explicitly, right? That if the person, like Rabbi Akiva's case, was killed, I'm sorry, like Bar Kokhba, the case of Bar Kokhba was killed, it's not the Mashiach. And as the Rambam said, he may have been a very fine person, extremely fine person, but the generation wasn't worthy. So he's not the Mashiach, period. Now, it is important to point out, and implied in my previous statement, that when he was alive, according to the Rambam's theory, one possibly could have declared the Rambam to be, the Lubavitcher Rebbe to be what? Help me out. In terms of Mashiach credentials.
Cheskat Mashiach.
Sorry?
Cheskat Mashiach.
Thank you. Who said that? That was Kenny?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the Cheskat Mashiach. Presumption of Mashiach. Remember, that's the Rambam's process. If a person accomplishes certain items, I don't know if the Rambam means specifically those 5 things that he enumerates, but accomplishes part of the messianic to-do list, then you could say he's bechezkat Mashiach. Now, it doesn't mean that when you point to him, you have to be careful with what you say. You know, he is bechezkat Mashiach. You have to say bechezkat Mashiach, because the way at least the Talmud describes Rabbi Akiva, he didn't point to Bar Kokhba and say, he is Bechezkat Mashiach. He pointed to Bar Kokhba and said in Aramaic, Dain Malka Mashiach. This one is the King Messiah, right? So the fact that we have this description of Rabbi Akiva declaring Bar Kokhba to be the Messiah, and the Rambam understands it to be Bechezkat Mashiach, the same thing here, that while Lubavitcher Rebbe was alive, he could have been Mashiach in the sense of Bechezkat Mashiach. But once he dies without accomplishing the messianic to-do list, then he is, according to Rambam, clearly not Mashiach. I just want to just point out, and Bruce, I'll take your question after that, and that is that, well, what is there about Lubavitcher Rebbe that would make us even think that he's Bechezkat Mashiach? Well, just things that were enumerated by the Rambam. So, a king from the house of David. Well, I don't know about king part, but from the house of David. The Lubavitcher Rebbe had a family tree that took him back to the Maharal, and the Maharal had a family tree taking back to King David. The fact that he was involved with mitzvot, Torah, with the oral law and the written law, obviously. The fact that many Jews were brought back to Torah and strengthening Torah observance, phenomenal. And the fighting the wars of the Lord. You ever see a mitzvah tank? And Sibos Hashem, the army of the Lord. I'm a general in the army of the Lord. I'm being funny about the last part. But, clearly Lubavitch Rebbe was an incredibly impressive personality who had the yichus and accomplishments that I think that one could have declared him to be the Chezkat Mashiach. And like we said, since he died without accomplishing the other elements, the Rambam would to my mind, without a doubt, would say it's a disappointment, not because of Lubavitch Rebbe, but because of us. And that's how we interpret it. We didn't deserve, that he accomplished the full accomplishment of the messianic to-do list. Yes.
What is your opinion? How do you think the Rambam? What is he meaning when he says Milchamot Hashem, that he's fighting the wars of the Lord? Do you think he means?
I think it means literally.
Wars.
Battle.
Blood. Well, that would be enough to disqualify any rabbi.
Well,
yes.
Except the rabbi I wanted to ask about, which is Rabbi Akiva. Was he being humble?
Well, wait. I just want to step back and I want to address the question that Daniel's asking. That is that, I'm not sure why you're saying that, because it's just as a theoretical. Let's say Effie Etam would have stayed in politics. He's a general, right? So it doesn't mean, by the way, that he necessarily personally goes out to the front, but he's the commander in chief, and there are battles against the enemies of the Jewish people. I don't know if you mean it's enough to disqualify rabbis, absolutely, or just in the past. It's a theoretical possibility. Why not? F.E.A. Tom. And thank you, Arthur, for that welcome Mashiach background you have there.
No, but the Lubavitch Rebbe is not even in Eretz Yisrael.
Wait, I just actually wanted to get Dan's response. He looks a little like he's not happy.
Well, Bruce just said the first two words. What I was going to say was he's not even in Israel, so how can he possibly be fighting the battles of God?
Yeah, okay. So you're right. So talking about Lubavitch Rebbe? Yeah, so I agree. So, but considering that's why I was being facetious about the battles of the Lord there.
No, my response was that any rabbi I could possibly think of in history has never led people into battle.
That's because they've never been Mashiach.
No,
but
except Rabbi Akiva. That's what I'm saying. Rabbi Akiva,
perhaps.
why wasn't he viewed as the Hezkat Mashiach? And Rabbi Bakar simply worked for him. But he's the leader of the Torah world. He's the leader of Israel.
Yeah, so I don't know the answer to that question, but I'm just pointing out that the fact that we haven't had somebody who's accomplished all the qualities till now, it's circular. That's why we don't have Mashiach yet. That's just another way of saying nobody has stepped up to the plate who qualifies in every single possible way yet.
No, I was saying this because I also have great regard for the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, we should add, those who believe that he's indeed gone. But you could make that claim about any great Gadol Hador in the last few hundred years. There must be others on the list that you could say we could make the claim about them.
Okay, so that's possible. I would agree. It could be that I don't know about other considered groups that might have considered to be their rabbi as Chezkat Mashiach. I'm not aware of it, but it could theoretically have been true that someone would make a claim. So you're right, except for, I think we would all agree that I don't know if we'd all agree, but I would at least think that the accomplishments of the most recent Lubavitch Rebbe are extraordinary, and it's not just once in a lifetime. He really is extraordinary over centuries. It's hard to identify one person who has made such an unbelievably profound impact upon Jewish life on a global level than the most recent Lubavitcher Rebbe. So, but the point remains that he's impressive. But since he didn't accomplish the bottom line, he didn't accomplish all of the things. He's obviously not Mashiach B'vadai, according to the Rambam. And it sounds like you want to say, and maybe why would you even say he's B'chezkat Mashiach? So
Yeah.
be a little generous. He's extraordinarily impressive. And like I said before, and Rav Chaim will I'll be ending in just a second. He obviously accomplished. I don't think the Rambam necessarily thinks you have to accomplish A, B, C, D. Right? It could be A, B, C is enough, or A, B. I don't know. It's very hard to know from the Rambam. But the bottom line is that, at least in terms of the reasonableness of the claim, I can understand the claim of Cheskat Mashiach. But according to the Rambam, I see no way to understand the Rambam being used or what I'm going to show you next time, and that's going to be the second source sheet that I've been sending out for the last 2 weeks, that it's true what I said according to the Rambam, but the Rambam is not the only voice in town on this. And then there may be sources which would validate the notion of the Lubavitcher Rebbe was and is the Mashiach. And we will see those sources next time in Mashiach Part 4. Rav Chaim, it's all yours.
It's a cliffhanger. Thank you very much.